Hello everybody, welcome to another virtual learning experience with the Town of Wytheville Department of Museums. I'm Andrea, and today we are at the E. Lee Trinkle Visitor Center here in Wytheville. And our program today is going to be all about a very special insect. And I want you to think for a minute about what we might be learning about. I'll give you a couple of hints. It's an insect that makes a buzzing noise, and it likes to fly around to different flowers to collect something very sweet, and it makes something that we can eat. Do you have any ideas? Why don't you come with me and we're going to show you exactly what we'll be talking about today. Did you guess? Were you able to guess what we're going to learn about? That's right, today we're going to be talking all about honeybees. And we have a bee home right here in this room, and this is a place where we have lots of busy bees working and living. And this is their winter home. We're going to be trading them out into their summer home pretty soon here so they can have a little bit more room. You might see this little jar here on the top. This is just got a mixture of sugar and water inside, and that's how we feed the bees in the wintertime to make sure that they have enough to eat. Now that it's getting warm and the flowers are blooming outside, the bees actually do want to go out and start to collect some of the nectar from those flowers. And if you can see, there's a little tube down here, and that's connected to their home. So bees can fly down through that tube and go outside of the house and then come back in and bring the nectar and the pollen back into their home. So this is what we have here at the Visitor Center. And we wish that you could be here right in this room with me to see the bees in person, but we thought we would try to show them to you for our virtual learning experience. If you're following along with the video, you can download some of the worksheets that we have. We have a vocabulary sheet for our kids maybe in second grade and up. And then we also have a sheet for younger kids where you can match up the different types of bees that we're going to be talking about and what their names are. So I want you all to think for just a minute here, and I want you to think, what is the name that we give a home for a bee? What do we call the place where a bee lives? Have you thought of it yet? That's right, we call it a hive. And this right here is a hive. So a hive can either be a nest that the bees make by themselves to live in, or it could be something that's built by humans that bees can live in, something that humans build specifically and specially for bees to live and work and do all the amazing things that they do. So inside of a hive, there can be up to 100,000 bees, depending on how big the hive is. And inside that hive, even with all of those bees, there are actually only 3 different types of bees. But those 3 different types of bees, there are a lot of different jobs that they can do. So we will talk about all of those. Inside the hive, the bees live together in something that's called a society. And a society just means when people or animals or insects are all living together and working together as part of a community. So that's what society means, and the bees in the hive have a society. The society is very complex, and complex means that it takes a lot of different parts to make up the whole thing. And by that we mean that there's a lot of bees and they have a lot of different jobs, and they all have to work together and do their jobs in order for their society, in order for their hive to work. So bees have a complex society. So let's talk about the different kind of bees that live inside of a hive. There are 3 types of bees that live in a hive, and I've got pictures of them here. 1, 2, 3. And you'll probably notice that this one in the center is the biggest bee. Now in real life, not in this picture here, but in real life, this center bee is about 3/4 of an inch long. So pretty small still. And this center bee is called the queen. and there's only one queen in every hive. The queen has one very special, very important job. The queen's job is to lay eggs so that we can continue to have more and more bees throughout the life of the hive. So that is the main job of the queen. There's only one queen, and she can live for about 3 to 5 years. In her entire lifetime, she could lay up to 1,000,000 eggs. Isn't that amazing? 1,000,000 eggs, and she might even lay 1,000 eggs in a single day. So she has a pretty important job. The next bee that we're going to talk about is this one over here. And he's a little bit smaller, but he's still bigger than this one, which we'll talk about in a minute. He's a little bit smaller, and you might have noticed that I said he. The queen is always a girl or a female bee. These ones here are called drones. And the drones are always male or boy bees. And the drones really just have one important job too. Their job is to mate with the queen so that we can have baby bees. The drones only live for about 8 weeks, and when they're done doing their job, the rest of the bees, they kind of just kick him out of the hive because he doesn't really do anything else. He doesn't even feed himself. The other bees have to bring him food and take care of him. So once he's done his job, once they've done their job of mating with the queen, the other bees don't want him around in the hive anymore because he'll just eat honey and not do anything. So that's the drone. The third type of bee over here is the smallest bee, and it's only about 1/2 inch big. And this is what there are the most of. There are hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of worker bees inside a hive. And that's where we get our phrase, you might have heard people say it before, busy as a bee. That's where we get this phrase from. So these little ones are called worker bees. And the worker bees have lots and lots and lots of different jobs. So the worker bees their jobs can be maybe going outside of the hive to collect nectar and pollen. Their job might be to guard the hive from other bees that might try to get in that they don't want inside the hive. Some of their job is to turn nectar into honey. Some of their job is to take care of the brood, which is the baby bees that haven't been born yet. I've actually got a picture of some of the brood in a hive. You can see they're kind of just curled up right here. These are little tiny bees that haven't been born yet. They're in a stage of life called larva, and some of the worker bees will take care of them and feed them everything that they need to grow into full-grown bees. Now, I said that the worker bees have lots of different jobs, but there are so many worker bees because each worker bee only does one of those jobs. So a worker bee might only go out and collect nectar and pollen, and then they will leave the other jobs to the other worker bees who each have their own specific job. Now, we all know that bees like to go out and they like to fly around from flower to flower. And what is it that they're doing when they do that? So what are some of the things that we can get from a beehive? Can you think of what they are? We can get something called beeswax, and this is what the bees use to make their honeycombs inside. It's wax, and we can use it for different things like candles. We can make candles out of it. But what else do bees make? You might even have some in your cupboard right now. That's right, bees make honey. So let's talk for a minute about how bees make honey. It's always the worker bees who make honey, and the worker bees will go out and collect pollen and nectar from flowers, and they will bring it back to the hive. And on the way back to the hive, they store it in one of their 2 stomachs. Did you know that bees have 2 stomachs? They'll store it in their stomach, it's called a honey stomach, and they'll bring it back to the hive, and then they actually have to work with other bees to make that nectar into honey. And it's a little bit of an interesting way that bees use to make honey. So the bees that come back with the nectar in their stomach will actually then spit the nectar out into the mouth of another bee, and that bee will put it in their honey stomach. And then that bee will then spit it out and pass it along to another worker bee. And they will keep going down the line until the nectar finally becomes honey. And how that happens is because inside of a bee's honey stomach, there's something special called enzymes. And these are special kinds of proteins that are inside a bee's stomach, and they help turn that nectar into honey. Now here's a picture of some worker bees working really hard. You can see this is their honeycomb made out of beeswax, and it has a special shape. It's in a 6-sided shape called a hexagon. And inside those hexagons, some of them will have baby bees, part of that brood that hasn't been born yet. Some of them will be filled with honey, and then when they're all filled with honey, they will actually cap them off with some more beeswax. So these worker bees are working really, really hard. Now, people have been keeping bees for thousands of years because we really like the things that bees make, like honey and beeswax. We can go all the way back to the ancient Egyptians, 4,000 years ago, and we know that they kept honey. They used their honey, they kept bees. They kept bees so that they kept honey for sweetener, and they used the beeswax for making mummies. And so ever since that time, people have been keeping bees. They can keep them in all sorts of different hives. Bees were not actually native to North America, which is where we live. The European settlers brought bees over to North America in 1622 because by then people knew how many great things bees could do for us. So they thought it was important to bring bees from Europe to the colonies to start raising them. This is a picture of different kinds of beehives that people have created over time with different ways to keep bees. You can see there's all kinds of different shapes. Some that look a little bit like cones or cylinders or rectangles. This that I have right here, this is called a skep. And this is one type of hive that people can make for bees. It looks a little bit like an upside down basket. And if there were bees living inside of this skep, you would turn it over and it would look like this on the inside. So you can see all of the honeycombs here and all of the bees working. They're all tucked inside that little basket type item called a skep. Now, a lot of beekeepers today use a design that was made by Reverend Langstroth, and he is considered the father of modern beekeeping because he invented a really neat hive, and it's named after him. It's called the Langstroth hive, and it looks kind of like stacked boxes. And inside those hives, they all come apart like this. You've got all your different parts to the Langstroth hive. And if you were to take out the bees, they would come out in a frame like this. And Reverend Langstroth wanted to develop a hive. He wanted to make a hive like this because he thought it would be easier to get the bees out and to get the honey out without making the bees too upset. So this was his invention that he made in the 1850s, and this is still the kind of hive many, many people use today. So the beekeeper could take out the frames that have the honeycomb and the honey. They can carefully remove the bees off of the frame, and then they put the frame into a machine that spins it really fast, and it spins out all of the honey from the honeycombs. And then the beekeeper can put the hive back in and let the bees start their work all over again, making all of that delicious honey. Now, for beekeepers, they need to have some special equipment because we all know that bees do something that can kind of hurt us. They can sting us, can't they? And bees only will sting if they feel like they're being threatened, if they feel like they're in trouble. And so beekeepers need to have protection when they're taking their bees and their honeycombs out of the hive. So here are some different things that a beekeeper might use. Now, if you boys and girls were here at the visitor center, I would probably let one or two of you try this on. This is a suit like one that a beekeeper would wear, and it protects all the way down the arms and the legs, and it zips right up tall to your neck. So this is a suit that a beekeeper would wear. And also some gloves. And these gloves are leather on the bottom over the hand, because that's a nice thick material that would keep the bees from stinging the beekeeper's hands. And they also go, if you can see here, they go all the way up to my elbow. So that keeps all my skin safe there up to the elbow. So with the suit and the gloves, but there's one more thing that's not protected yet. Can you think of what that is? What do I need to keep protected still? My face, right? So this is a beekeeper's hat. I'm gonna put it on so that you can all see how it works. It sits right there on top of my head, and it has this special netting, and it's a little bit set out from my face so that it's not right up against my eyes, and netting down here, and it protects the bees from being able to fly close to my face. But with the screen, I can still see through, and I can see everything that I'm doing with my hands to take the bees out of their hive and get the honey out of the hive. So these are some of the different things that a beekeeper will wear to keep them safe and protected from getting stung by bees. So we've talked about the different kinds of bees and the jobs that they do, and we've talked about what beekeepers use to keep bees. So there's still the question about why is it so important to keep bees, and why do people do it? Well, there's a couple things. Of course, we talked about those good things that bees make, the beeswax and the honey. And when beekeepers keep bees, what they're doing is they're encouraging the bees to make a little bit more honey than they actually need. So the bees use the honey for their food, but if they make a little bit extra, then we can enjoy the delicious honey for ourselves. So that's one reason that bees are important to keep. But also, bees are part of a really important group of organisms called pollinators. And if you look at this word, pollinator, you might see part of that word that sounds a little bit familiar. And that first part sounds like pollen, doesn't it? Where does pollen come from? Yeah, it comes from flowers. So a pollinator is a group of organisms, usually an insect or birds, and they are helpful in spreading pollen from one flower to another. And pollen is important because it helps the flowers to continue reproducing so that there will be more flowers. And it's not only important to pollinate flowers, but bees also pollinate crops, so food that is grown for us to eat. Bees will actually take pollen from one plant to another so that the plants can continue growing. A lot of the food that we eat wouldn't be possible without bees as pollinators. And bees are pollinators without even really trying. I have a picture here of a bee, and you can see that it's landed on a flower and is using its long tongue to drink some nectar. But you might notice that kind of on its little furry body here, there's all this little yellow powder that's stuck to it. So the bees, just by stopping to drink the nectar, will collect pollen on their bodies, and then when they fly to another flower, they will actually leave some of this pollen on the next flower. And flowers and crops need pollen from other plants in order to continue growing and reproducing. One plant can't pollinate itself, so bees are really important to pollinate our flowers and our crops. Now, what can you do to help bees pollinate flowers and crops? Well, you could plant a garden in your yard, and you're going to see a couple of pictures here. We actually have a garden here at the visitor center, and it's all for bees. It's filled with plants that are really good for bees, and they really attract bees and other pollinators to come to the garden. And if you wanted to plant a pollinator garden at home, it would be a good idea to plant lots of different varieties of flowers, lots of different flowers that are native to our part of Southwest Virginia, flowers that were found here naturally. And it's important to use flowers with lots of bright colors. Bees see color a little bit differently than we do, but they are really attracted to colors like blue and purple. Those are the two colors that bees see best. So purple and blue flowers are good for a pollinator garden, and also flowers that have maybe a different color in the center than they do around the outside, so maybe like a daisy, because the yellow center on a daisy kind of looks like a bullseye to a bee, so they might come right into the center of that daisy to slurp up the nectar. So that's a really important way that you could help to support bees by giving them lots of good flowers and nectar to drink. Here's our pollinator garden here at the visitor center, and you can see there's not really a lot growing here yet,
But come later this spring and summer, it will be filled with all sorts of different flowers that will bring honeybees here.
Now, I just wanted to share a couple more really interesting facts about bees. I wanted to tell you, first of all, that in addition to their 2 stomachs, bees also have 6 legs, just like all other insects, and they have 2 sets of wings. And those 2 sets of wings can help them to fly up to 12 miles an hour to visit flowers to collect nectar and pollen. And did you know that bees might travel to 1,000 different flowers just to fill up their one little honey stomach? I just thought those are some really interesting facts about bees that you might like to know. Thank you so much for joining us today for our virtual learning experience all about busy bees right in your backyard. And I know that sometimes bees can be a little scary to us because they have those stingers, but I hope that today you learned all of the wonderful things about bees and why they're so important to us and how you can help them. So thank you again and have a great day.